Hey, bestie. Welcome to episode 7. This episode is for you if you're feeling bombarded by all the marketing and branding gurus telling you to become a storyteller, feeling bombarded and less that. Believe it or not, I can relate because for the longest time, I didn't feel like a storyteller. Even though I've been a writer for most of my life, I had compartmentalized storytelling to writing fictions or the movies and TV shows that I love to watch. I couldn't see how my favorite pastimes related to growing a personal brand or why all of a sudden businesses needed to become Pixar studio level storytellers just to sell their products and services. And then one day in 2024, I experienced the unlock that changed everything. So, if you want to understand why storytelling is important to the personal or business brand you're building, and you're wondering how you can experience your own unlock, and you want to discover how telling stories will help you create social media content that sticks, memorable presentations, or write books that changes lives, then keep listening as I share how I tapped into my inner storyteller, and you can too. Welcome to Your Business Book Bestie, a solo podcast experience hosted by me, Denise Renee. I help Gen X and millennial professionals write books that make their career, business, or thought leadership brand visible. This podcast is an invitation into the running conversation in my head about writing books, building a brand, and cultural touch points that relate. So grab a cozy beverage and let's chat. Part 1: Why Storytelling Matters for Personal and Business Brands in 2026. Bestie, do you remember TiVo? Sidebar. They are still around. They've just diversified their offerings and are no longer manufacturing the little boxes. Now, I remember when TiVo boxes first disrupted the scene in 1999. Then, cable companies quickly caught up with their versions of DVRs in the early 2000s. Now, I never got a TiVo specifically, but I did get the DVR from my cable company because it was cheaper than the TiVos. And I loved it. It was such a step up from constantly buying tapes for the VCR. Yeah, remember those? Okay. But DVRs was a step up from constantly having to buy tapes for the VCR and having other family members accidentally erase my shows. Yeah, not fun. So DVRs, if you happen to be a young millennial, a Gen Zer, or Gen Alpha like my son, who likes to say that I'm from the dinosaur age, that dude. Anywho, so if you don't know, DVRs were like VCRs with unlimited storage, and you could record programs on different channels simultaneously. This meant that I never had to miss my favorite shows again. And the best part about it was skipping commercials on playback was super easy. In fact, it was really revolutionary for live TV watching. The introduction of DVRs into my life was the beginning of commercial-less TV viewing for me. Because for most of the shows that I watched, I didn't mind waiting a day or two to watch them just so I could skip the commercials easily. But there was always one or two shows every year that I had to watch in real time. With DVR technology, I figured out a way for skipping commercials on live TV shows that I wanted to watch in real time. In the early 2000s, I was addicted to watching the show 24, starring Kiefer Sutherland, and I had to watch it live every week. Because, baby, it was and still is Jack Bauer and Chloe for me, okay? That show kept me on the edge of my seat. The writing was so good. It was about this counter-terrorist unit of the government and its super agent, Jack Bauer, aka Kiefer Sutherland. Now, he always faced the most precarious situations and diplomatic nightmares, but he wasn't alone. His faithful personal tech genius, Chloe, was always in his earpiece. She always found the right information for Jack in the nick of time. Now, Jack's methods for getting the job done invariably bent the rules and quite frankly, a few laws, both nationally and internationally. And it happened so much that it was always putting him at risk of being disavowed by the government. Like literally the end of one season, I forget which country it was, but he was in jail in some other country and the United States just left him for dead. But no matter what, being our consummate hero, he always got the job done under the most impossible scenarios and stakes. Now, the premise of the show is completely unique. One season occurred within the 24 hours of a given day, hence the show's name. Each season had 24 hours. Each episode was 1 hour within that day. So the action in each individual episode occurred within the real running time of the show. You know how Law and Order has that signature gravel sound? Well, 24 also had its own signature sound too. It was two digital blips, one low and the other slightly higher, like beep, 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 beep. That damn digital clock ticking away the seconds was an unnerving, anxiety-inducing plot device. It served to heighten the sense of urgency because the writers always left us on a mini cliffhanger at every commercial break. And then each episode would end on the biggest cliffhanger. And the wait for next week's episode was almost unbearable. And there was nothing I could do about that. But I could do something about waiting in between commercials in real time. Nah. So this was my hack. When 8 p.m. came around and the show was live, I had the DVR scheduled to turn on and record the show. I'd putter around the house through the first two sets of commercials, then I'd grab my snacks and start watching at exactly 8:24 p.m. I'd rewind the DVR to the beginning of the show. Then, because I was behind the live broadcast, I was able to fast forward through the commercials. That trick allowed me to catch up to the last set of commercials and watch the last segment of the show in real time, ending at 9 p.m. Phew. Now, that was a lot of mental and technical gymnastics just to avoid watching some commercials. Now, thankfully, we've come a long way in our ability to ignore advertising messaging in the last 24 years or so. Like what I did there? Yeah, little punny pun pun. All right. Corny joke aside, the moral of that little story is that nowadays we will do anything to avoid commercials. We have become professional ad blockers. No software required. We are so quick to tap the skip ad button, the little white X, or anything else we need to swipe by to remove annoying ads from our presence as soon as those mandatory seconds are up. Why? Because as consumers today, we're no longer easily moved by the ultra slick, persuasive copy and celebrity endorsements. In fact, we pick apart celebrity commercials. Did you see the discourse about Sydney Sweeney's jeans commercial or Mariah Carey's Christmas is canceled commercial? Yeah. Anything that doesn't seem authentic or is too salesy, we're giving it a hard pass without a second opportunity to make a first impression. But well-told stories stop our scrolling. Relatability makes us relax our guard. Heartfelt or curiosity-inducing stories suck us in. Storytelling in business is all about getting your target audience to stop the scroll long enough to suck them into a scenario that facilitates making a relatable human connection with you or your business. If a consumer or buyer doesn't feel an authentic connection to a brand these days, whether that brand is an individual, an artist, creator, or company, that brand is not going to survive for very long. In full transparency, while I understand it now, for quite some time, I didn't get it. Part 2. Why I didn't feel like a storyteller. Storytelling used to have two distinct meanings in my mind. One applied to business, the other to creative works, like books or my favorite TV shows, like I said. On the one side, quote unquote storytelling was just a huge buzzword in marketing circles for several years that only seemed to be getting buzzier. And yes, I just made up my own word. The prevailing thought is that by telling stories, it will be easier to get people to buy into your brand and eventually buy your stuff, or buy into the ideas you're looking to share. Now, although there's tons of neuroscience and empirical evidence to prove why this works, I wasn't convinced because experiencing the groundswell of commentary, content, books, videos, and anecdotes about storytelling for business, it all left me feeling insecure about my ability to tell stories that could grow my business. Now, in theory, I shouldn't have felt that way because I've been writing short stories since I was 8 years old, but I genuinely didn't feel like a storyteller. For me, stories and storytelling existed only in the creative realms. Storytelling had everything to do with my favorite TV shows like 24 and La Femme Nikita, both shows by the same creators, by the way, Joel Surnow and Robert Cochran. They were master storytellers in my eyes. And of course, some of my favorite Black women fiction writers like Jamaica Kincaid, Alice Walker, and Toni K. Bambara are masterful storytellers in their disciplines. And public speakers, they are great storytellers to me too. Take Bill Clinton, for example. Now, like him, love him, or leave him, but Bill Clinton won the White House because of his ability to connect with people through effective storytelling. In my mind, my storytelling abilities were limited to one expression: writing fiction. Oddly enough, I even doubted that because even though for my BA in English, I completed a concentration in creative writing, I've never published any of my fiction, like to this day that I'm recording this in November of 2025. Still haven't published any fiction, and I've been writing it for decades. But don't worry, I'll be changing that really soon. Since completing undergrad in 1995, I've been nurturing a negative self image about my writing. I constantly wondered if I could consider myself a quote unquote real writer when I hadn't published any books. Yes, I was using my skills as a ghostwriter, as a content writer, as a manuscript editor, and as a book writing coach for business people and companies. And the only things I've ever published were blogs, videos, and audio content. I mean, they do count for something, but it's not like publishing a book. For me, storytelling lived over there, far away from the business services that I provided. As far as I was concerned, storytelling and growing my business were oil and water. They didn't mix. Besides, I didn't think I had enough of an exciting life. Like, who would want to hear my story? How transformative can it be if I could tell my story in just a few sentences? An American born child of West Indian immigrants is bullied in school for her dark skin, but has her revenge by being a nerd and earning her way into a prestigious college. Yeah. She starts her career as a high school English teacher and leads the music team in her church for 13 years until she gets married. She has one child, gets divorced in her 40s, and takes 10 years to remember who she was and figure her life back out. Now, I mean, who is listening to that story? Not me, and I'm the one telling it. How is that supposed to help me get more clients? Part three, an intimate moment, reveals the secret of storytelling. Tell me a story. Huh? I replied. Tell me a story, he asked in a gentler, quieter tone. I froze. My eyes widened like the proverbial deer in headlights. My mind scrambled, panicked from dozens of questions that attacked all at once. What kind of story does he want me to tell? A story for kids? A story for adults? One that I wrote? But I can't remember them like that. That's why they're all on paper. What if he doesn't like the story I tell him? Is he still going to like me? Then, as if my Macintosh PowerBook 145B accidentally rebooted before I could save my work, my mind went as blank as a fresh document with a blinking cursor. His voice snapped me back into the moment. You're a writer, right? Yeah. My voice was sheepish. So you should be able to tell me a story. So, tell me a story. Mischief danced in his voice. We were just having a great moment. Why was he playing with me? Didn't he know writing stories on paper and telling them out loud were two different disciplines? I learned that the hard way in Charles Nero's rhetoric class the previous year. Weren't we both two Black kids smart enough to get into this elite New England college? What's he talking about? He spooned his bare chest deeper into my naked back and snuggled his chin onto my shoulder. Tell me a story. His barely audible whisper tickled my ear. Warmth shot through my body. Melted, I was powerless against the command. I instantly complied. Now, I can't remember what tumbled out of my mouth, but whatever I said, it was enough. When I finished a few minutes later, he leaned back, crooked his elbow to rest his chin into his knuckles, and looked at me with a satisfied grin. Now, that wasn't so hard, was it? I yanked that pillow from under him so fast he didn't see the whack coming. He laughed and pulled me closer and held me long enough until I couldn't help but start giggling too. But telling that story really was hard for me because I identified as a writer, not a storyteller. Part 4. Storytelling isn't a medium, it's an emotional connection. That moment in time occurred in February 1995, a few months before I was set to graduate college. I was 21 years old, and I had spent the prior 12 years of my life cultivating my passion for reading and creative writing. I was knee deep in the struggle to finish up my honors English thesis project so I could prepare for my defense. My English thesis was a literary analysis of Paul Marshall's work as a Caribbean American writer. To reflect my degree's concentration in creative writing, I was also set to write a suite of short stories about my own experiences as a Caribbean American young woman as my entry point into the canon. Simultaneously, my other major was music, with a concentration in composition. Are you sensing a theme? Your bestie is creative, okay? Now, for my music thesis project, I was composing a suite of original jazz music and making all the preparations for the required performance concert, including getting people to show up in the audience. Let me tell you something. Bates College did not believe in letting you out the door without a requisite doctoral level style obstacle course in the last mile to make sure you knew that you earned your degree. Ah, the self imposed pressure of it all. That was the one and only time in my life that I ever suffered an extreme case of writer's block. Because for my English thesis, in preparation, I had read countless books over the summer before my senior year so I could get a head start. I started and abandoned several drafts for my thesis. By the time February came around, I had nothing significant written, and the clock was running out. My late March jury date for my English thesis loomed like a specter. I'm not even going to talk about the 5 composition pieces that I needed to finish for my music thesis, the concert I was responsible for putting together, or the 13 musicians I needed to gather and rehearse in order to pull it off. And like I said, I even had to advertise the concert and make sure the Olin Arts Center concert hall was filled. That was all scheduled for April. And in February, I couldn't even think about it because I had to get past the English thesis first. The only thing I had to show for 7 months of quote unquote work on my English thesis was about 80 pages of notes that refused to come together in a meaningful way. To top it off, I had started a couple of the short stories, but they were nowhere near finished. Needless to say, I was quite the ball of nerves around the time this um, intimate moment took place with my guy friend that February evening. Our undefined, more than friends, but not officially dating relationship was an oasis where I felt like myself because the pressure I was under had turned me into a very different, very short tempered person. But there he went, wrecking my mood by terrorizing me with those 4 words: tell me a story. Only in retrospect did I realize it was his way of trying to help me out of my writing rut, the same way he influenced me to eat. I was so stressed out since the beginning of the school year that I had lost my appetite for months. I had dropped so much weight during the first semester, rumors swirled that I was anorexic. I only went to Commons, our dining hall, once a day in the evenings, and it was just to be social and catch up with my friends. I went through the line, I'd pick up an entree, but after 2 bites of anything, I felt overwhelmingly full. My guy friend was the only one who managed to get me to eat a little bit more. I gotta admit, he was really sneaky about it. He'd come into my room later on in the evenings, he'd bring his books to study and work on my laptop, and then he'd say he was hungry. Then he asked me what I had. I usually just had ramen noodles or some bread and peanut butter. He'd make whatever it was, take a few bites, and then offered me some. Then somehow I was the one who finished it up. One day, he finally admitted his master plan. I'm never really hungry. I just want you to eat something. Like I said, our time together had a calming effect on me. So his asking me to tell him a story was just his way of getting me to start writing again, to stop overthinking and start writing. He knew it was in me. I just had to let it out. But to me, telling a story was a whole different ballgame than writing one. I didn't consider myself an orator. I wasn't a preacher. I wasn't a comedian. And I wasn't an actor. My work lived on the page where I had time to labor over each word before showing it to anyone. I was looking at the oral tradition part of storytelling. But storytelling is as much an oral tradition as it is a written one. In my mind, storytellers are naturally gifted masters of spoken or written art forms, plus the artists who bring them to life, such as actors, dancers, and musicians. They're all storytellers. The disconnect for me was the medium. But I finally learned that the medium doesn't matter. When I look back at this moment with my guy friend, the story I told him didn't matter to him. The way I told it to him also didn't matter. I had shared something from the heart and told it from beginning to end, and that's all he was trying to get me to do. And telling that story had an effect on him and me, not just in that moment, but for years to come. Because 30 years later, even though I don't remember the exact story I told, I remember the emotional connection it made. Part 5. We are all natural storytellers. After years of working as a professional writer and editor in a variety of business and creative settings, I've finally stopped seeing each iteration or function as something separate. Storytelling isn't about the form or medium it's expressed through. It isn't even about the events you tell in the story. The point is to make an emotional connection with the person experiencing the story. This can happen in a one on one conversation. It can happen amongst a group of friends at a coffee shop. That connection can be made while reading a book or watching a movie, whether it's a totally made up story or based on someone's real life. That emotional connection can even be experienced in a 30-second heartwarming commercial for baby diapers. Regardless of the medium, the point is for the person experiencing the story to be able to see themselves in it and relate. As a result, they feel something, and the story inspires an aha moment. The person experiencing the story is now influenced or inspired to think differently or to take a new action in some area of their life. The right story, experienced at the right time, can create a major pivot. That is the point of storytelling. And that is all you or I ever need to focus on, no matter what medium we're telling our story through, or the purpose for which we're telling that story. The fact of the matter is, we've all been baptized in stories since we were babies. We were encouraged to use our imaginations as toddlers, but then we got in trouble if we started telling tall tales once we were school aged. Ever since then, we've been telling stories to each other every single day. You and I, we tell stories to our family and friends about the things that happened in our day. We share gossip. We talk about that funny thing that happened on the way to work. And we recommend products, movies to watch, and new music to listen to by sharing our experiences. Day in and day out, we hook our audience's attention, even if it's an audience of one. We draw them into the circumstances, and we get an emotional response out of them as a result. We invariably influence the decision they make about whether or not to treat Debbie, an accountant, as a friend or a foe. They also decide whether that new movie is worth seeing in the theater or waiting till it comes out on streaming. That is the essence and influence of storytelling. Make a connection, transfer an emotion, influence a decision. Can you see now why it's so powerful for brand building and business growth purposes? Now, while we are all natural storytellers and we're telling stories all day long, every single day, some of us have intentionally sharpened our storytelling skills for specific mediums and have become better at it than most. But that doesn't mean you can't sit with us. Storytelling skills can be learned, perfected, and applied in a variety of mediums for an infinite array of purposes. And bestie, you know I'm not a gatekeeper, so I'm going to show you how it's done. Part 6. How I unlocked my inner storyteller. Once you see something, it's hard to unsee it. When it comes to seeing and unlocking my inner storyteller, that moment happened for me in 2024. But the moment had a catalyst. The seed of that catalyst was planted by a good friend of mine, PR strategist Nina Oglesby, the previous year. Nina and I always check in with each other to catch up on life and business. We have a transparent relationship and we're very honest with each other. One day, Nina shared that while my educational content was good, she thought that I should include more of my personal story in my content. That same freeze response that I had from my guy friend years earlier kicked in. I'm not a storyteller, I said to Nina. Besides, I don't have an interesting story to tell. My life is boring. I mean, you remember what I shared earlier in this episode, right? Well, baby, let me tell you something. Hey, Nina had heard me say that to her one time too many, and this time was her final straw. With all due respect, Denise Renee, Nina replied to me, I don't ever want to hear you say that again. You do have a story to tell. She then proceeded to call me out of my stinking thinking in a way that only someone who cares about you could. Her words hit home, and I had to sit with myself. I looked at things from her perspective and had to admit that just because I lived it, I was biased about my own story. I didn't have the right to declare my story as boring or insignificant because I truly didn't know who I could potentially be impacting and helping on their journey. Nina also challenged me to stop thinking of my storytelling abilities as relegated to one medium. I didn't make any immediate changes, but her words had taken root. And over the weeks and months that followed, I began to see and experience stories and storytelling everywhere. It took a little time for those experiences to take root in my mindset and germinate. But finally, a year later, the first leaves poked through the topsoil of my mind. In the spring of 2024, I was challenging myself on how to make my content more engaging. And Nina's words from a year prior flooded my memory. Tell your story. Even though I felt a little dumb and a whole lot more vulnerable, I decided to insert a quick little personal story into a LinkedIn article I was working on, which illustrated a point I was making. I hit publish. The piece didn't go viral, but it did generate the most engaged comments I had ever received on a LinkedIn article to that point. The depth of engagement surprised me the most. A few people replied back, sharing tidbits of their own stories. That experience was a major aha for me. Teaching people useful writing tips and tricks was cool, but sharing myself, that is what was making a real connection. Getting that hit of community building was addicting. I wanted to experience it again. So I did. I got more deeply connected responses on my next article. I quickly learned that sharing stories was a cheat code to making authentic connections with my followers. It made me so excited. I wanted to start experimenting with incorporating more stories in my videos. The question to myself was, how can I make my videos something people would want to share? How do I stand out from the other talking head book writing coaches out there? My guy friend's words from years earlier echoed in my head. Tell me a story. Nina's words to me the previous year now had more context. Tell your story. Experiencing stories in multiple mediums in the past year, finally, my resistance was broken. I knew that telling more stories in general and relevant parts of my own story in particular would be my differentiator. Make a connection, transfer an emotion, influence a decision. The more I open up and share emotional stories and teachable moments that stand out to me from my seemingly boring working class upbringing story, I know it's what makes people choose me over the book writing coach next door. Make a connection, transfer an emotion, influence a decision. The more I connect any points about the writing and self publishing process I'm teaching to stories that elicit an emotion so that they illustrate my points, I know that what I'm sharing will be remembered. Make a connection, transfer an emotion, influence a decision. I was 50 years young when I finally began seeing everything that I do in my life as a function of storytelling. And then I couldn't unsee it. Part 7. But what if I run out of stories to tell? I was riding high on my newfound storytelling confidence last year. I looked at every piece of content I was creating like I was Oprah giving out cars. Instagram reel, you get a story. LinkedIn article, you'll get a story. Long form YouTube video, you'll get a story. But then I got stopped in my tracks. I'm 50. I have a limited amount of living and major milestones or turning points of my life to talk about. What happens when I tell them all? Will that get boring for the people in my audience? Will I get tired of telling these same stories over and over? It was a ridiculous question because the answer immediately presented itself. Number one, I'm not limited to telling only stories about my life. Everything isn't all about me. I can tell my clients' stories. I can also borrow other people's stories, as long as I don't try to pass it off as my own. I had to go back to the point of telling stories, make a connection, transfer an emotion, influence a decision. The point is, regardless of whose story I tell, I just need to keep telling stories, period, as much as I can. It's all about making the emotional connection that builds my community. Number 2, I'm a writer. Now, I know how to show, not tell. I can take any situation and turn it into a vignette, whether that's for a video, a caption, an audio podcast, or a blog post. Number 3, even if I tell my story over and over, A, there will always be someone new who never heard it before. B, my diehard fans won't mind hearing it again. I mean, I know this to be true for myself. Case in point, I really appreciate Tabitha Brown and I love her story. Even though in 2025 she's made a few missteps with her audience, and there was one thing that she said that I didn't agree with, nevertheless, I still have a lot of respect for her. Now, I've lost count of how many interviews I've seen her in over the years. In fact, literally on the day that I'm recording this, I just watched another interview with her last night. I probably know her origin story pretty much as well as she does. I could probably tell it to you. But if 5 more interviews came across my YouTube recommended list today, I'd probably watch all 5. Even though she has been telling the same story about her life over and over, I know that in each of those 5 new interviews, she's probably going to tell it in a slightly different way. And that's just her origin story. Because what I watched last night was an episode of a new podcast. I forget what it's called, but it's by one of my favorite creators, Kev on Stage. He has a new podcast based on his book called Successful Failure. Oh, it's called Not My Finest Moment. There it is. And I'm going off script here, guys. But the premise of the podcast is to talk to people who we know to be very successful, but talk about those moments that don't always get a lot of shine. Those mistakes or those lessons or those missteps where they've probably learned a whole lot more, and those mistakes, quote unquote, are the things that shaped them more than the big highs that we all get to celebrate. And that's exactly what that podcast episode was about. So now, in addition to knowing her origin story very well, I now get to see her reflections on things that are happening to her in real time. So in that podcast episode, she addressed some of those missteps that she encountered with her audience this year. But let me get back on script, child. So even though Tabitha's going to tell the same story, she's probably going to tell it in a slightly different way. There's very likely going to be new details or new context that she can provide. It's highly likely that I'm going to learn about another little facet of her life and of her decision-making process. And the reason I'm so interested in that is because I admire what she has accomplished and I want to accomplish similar things myself. So I want to know, how did she do it? And even if I watch an interview with her and I don't learn anything new, I find it comforting to see her be incredibly consistent. Her story does not waver. She is the same person everywhere she goes. It's like rewatching my favorite movie or TV show. Even though I know all of the action that's going to happen, I'm watching because I want to relive my favorite emotional experience. Problem solved. No need to worry about my audience getting fatigued of my story, or running out of stories to tell. I can keep telling as many facets of my story as I can until I can't anymore. Over the last year, I've been experimenting with storytelling in all of my content to see what types of responses I get. I let the pendulum swing between extremes. Sometimes I'll deliver an old school 100% value driven listicle style content. Not one story in sight. Other times, I sprinkle in an anecdote or two to illustrate my points. And then there's the other extreme, like this podcast episode, where I've told a story in just about every single section, which has undoubtedly contributed to a very long runtime. But on the other hand, you're still listening, aren't you? Mm-hmm. Because those stories sucked you in, right? Yes, they did. Now, tell me in the comments if you thought it was a little bit too much. I went overboard on the stories, or if you just leaned in and didn't mind the time passing. This is an audio podcast after all, and you're probably busy doing something else. But I promise you this, there's at least one story that I told that's gonna remain with you for quite some time, and you're gonna remember it years later. I've been embracing and displaying my inner storyteller in all my content mediums. And the types of responses I've been getting to my content since implementing these changes are night and day. Part 8, how you can unlock your inner storyteller too. Okay, this is the last section, I promise. Now, it's super easy to look at other people we admire and think that they're better than us in some area and play the comparison game. I know I did it for a long time when it comes to admiring other storytellers. I literally spent this episode demonstrating that. But now it's that point where, after I've made a connection, I took you through my range of emotions and transformation. Now it's time for me to influence your next decision. I'm here to tell you that you can be a great storyteller. You can uplevel your content. You can write a memorable book. You can give great interviews on podcasts. You can give that TED Talk, all of it. But I know this is that part where you might start throwing up your resistance and start comparing yourself to even me. But Denise Renee, you might say, I don't have the background in writing you do. But Denise Renee, I don't have the on-camera personality that you display in your videos. I don't even have the presence in my voice that you do, where you're doing a solo podcast. My personality doesn't shine through in my voice like yours does. Now I'm going to tell you something. You are absolutely right. You don't have my lifelong love of writing or the crazy hoops I went through in college to earn my English degree. No, you probably didn't have an overnight radio show in the New York City area for 4 years to develop a radio style voice. And you probably didn't write and perform radio jingles and commercials like I did for years either. But you know what, bestie? I don't have your experiences either. We are not here to play comparison games, because becoming a better storyteller in business mediums isn't about trying to be like someone else. It's about being your best self. What's that combination of experiences and knowledge that's unique to you that needs to be on display? Look at my example, then follow the pattern and repeat it for your set of skills and circumstances. Don't compare, because we can't. It's impossible. We don't have the same lives, and it's okay. Remember, tapping into your inner storytelling is all about recognizing what you've naturally been doing from birth, listening to, experiencing, and trading stories with the people in your life. Every story you tell doesn't have to revolve around you, be about you, or about your life. Do not feel the pressure that you have to be the most interesting person in the world, like that guy from the Dos Equis beer commercials. The most interesting man in the world. Okay? Yeah, no, not mandatory. Okay. You don't even have to have great writing or great oratory skills. You just need to make a connection, transfer an emotion, and influence a decision. That's why I've repeated that about a bazillion times in this podcast. And there's no need to overcomplicate those three things. Storytelling is as simple as sharing what happened from beginning to end and the emotional reasons why those things happened. Life has its own drama. The stories you share will naturally have its ups and downs. Drama doesn't need to be manufactured. People just want to know that they can relate to you and that you get them. They want to be able to see themselves in you. That's why I like watching interviews with Tabitha Brown, because she's like a version of myself that I want to become. So I want to learn, how do I become my best self by following the pattern that she followed to become her best self. That's the way this works. Your journey to unlocking your inner storyteller starts with asking yourself a simple question. How can I share more stories in every communication I execute for my business or personal brand? Let me repeat that. Your journey to unlocking your inner storyteller starts with asking yourself a simple question. How can I share more stories in every communication I execute for my business or personal brand? Yes, every communication, including your emails, your website copy, your social media posts, your long form content, the voicemail on your phone system. Okay, well, maybe not the last one, but every touch point a client or prospective has with your business or brand is an opportunity to create a positive emotional connection. Here's a few ways that you can do that. Email. You don't have to turn a simple email into War and Peace. But if you can throw in a quick personal reference, that can be enough to grab attention and evoke a positive emotion. It could be as simple as one line that's personalized to the person receiving the email. Or if you're sending out your mass, email newsletter, it could be some personal anecdote or a quick story or a quick quote or something that will resonate with your audience. Website copy. Do you have generic, meaningless statements like, "We drive innovation for our clients" in the hero section of your website? Switch it out for one that touches the core of what your customers really want you to help them with. Now, when you visit my website, writingwithdeniserenee.com, you'll see a bold, value-driven statement at the top of my website. It punches my prospective clients right in their aspirations. And you know what it is? I say it every time in my intros to my podcast episodes. I help Gen X and millennial professionals write books that make their career, business, or thought leadership brand visible. And if you don't believe me, head over to writingwithdeniserenee.com to see it for yourself. Now, if you happen to be watching this a year or two or beyond from now, maybe that statement might be slightly tweaked. It's very likely going to reflect the customer that I'm looking to attract at that time, but it's going to be personal and all about the customer I'm looking to attract and work with. Social media posts. Social media posts are anything that's shorter than 300 words or so. It could be a quick post on X or Threads. It could be a meme or an edited photo with a caption. It could be a reel, a TikTok, or a short. Because you only have a few moments to make an impression, make it an emotional one. Ask yourself, what is the primary emotion you want the viewer to feel when they see your content? Pick visuals and write captions that play into that singular emotion. Long-form content. Long-form content includes articles that are 800 plus words, videos that are 8 or more minutes long, and podcast episodes. This can also extend to your webinars, presentations, speaking engagements, TED Talks, all of it. These mediums are primed for storytelling. Remember that people don't just want cold facts and figures. They want warm human connection. They want to relate. So don't just tell the 10 steps to do X. Illustrate as many of those points as you can with a quick story. Your stories can be quick or they can be involved, as a few of the stories that I shared on this podcast episode. Regardless of the length, your story has to accomplish our 3 core principles. What are they, class? Make a connection, transfer an emotion, and influence a decision. Very good, class. Hopefully, I have given you a few helpful prompts to kickstart your storytelling era 2 by sprinkling in more stories into your content and communications. It doesn't have to be complicated, and it doesn't always have to be your story. Just remember, The purpose of stories is to connect with the human on the other side of the device screen. All right, bestie. Thanks so much for chatting with me in this episode. I know it was a long one, but I really hope it was impactful. Replay it, take notes, and most importantly, take action. Continue the conversation with me by leaving me a comment. You can even drop me a link to a piece of content where you try to tell more stories in it if you want my feedback. And please do give this content a like or a heart, depending on the platform you're experiencing the podcast on. If you like getting encouraging, gentle nudges to write your book, or if you just like to see me drop more stories throughout all of my content, I invite you to join my email list. Every Monday morning around 5 a.m. Eastern, I share a simple, encouraging message related to writing books, building your brand, and growing your income. I include links to supporting articles, videos, and audio content that I published the previous week on various platforms. To join my email list, simply visit writingwithdeniserenee.com, scroll to the bottom of the home page, and enter your email address. Thank you so much for subscribing to this podcast on the platform you're experiencing it on. I appreciate you for sharing it with someone who you think should listen, and I'll be back for another chat in the next episode.